going to be sitting with the question, what does APEST look like in community? Because most of us are familiar with the model of the senior leader of excellence, or the single spokesperson. But as we step into APEST, as we're trying to imagine this, we want to start with Ephesians 4:1, which says that all of us have been called to walk worthy, or in a way which brings honor to, the household we've been brought in. And households at this time were structured around the chief male, the one patriarch, who was a representation of the gods at that time. And they sat over, they dictated, they ruled everything under the influence of the household, from wealth to people to extended family to the enslaved. As far as their influence went was as large as the household was. 4:6 makes this household thing vivid, explicit, using the patriarchal language, saying, one God, our Father, the one being over all, through all, and in all. And in that line, it says that the Father's influence has swallowed up all of creation. The household has expanded to include all humanity we can imagine. For them, this would have been a breakdown of the Romans, the Greek, and the Jewish people. For us, it probably goes into the multiplicities of ways we represent humanity and name our realities, because it cannot be shrunk into just a limited us. This makes each community that's sitting around these doors and calling on God a microcosm of the grander scale home of God, which must grow in such a way that it can be said we are moving towards building up the body of Christ. The previous multiple fathers' households are deconstructed so that the home can begin reconstruction under one father. However we proceed, though, however we hold space with each other and the other, it must wrestle with two things from Ephesians. One, Jesus upset every good and moral person by embracing people before protecting reputation or honor. Jesus practiced a shameless grace that empowered people, even named in this of the gifts of the fivefold structure for ministry that are supposed to govern his house. And so whatever we do to bring honor to this household has to look like it emanates from one who would embrace a shameless grace and presence with all people over honor in society. And two, God is named as Father in 4:6, and Jesus is named as Head in 4:15. Head and Father would be the same positions of power for the culture. Our God, named in chapter 4, is more interested in sharing power and co-creating rather than hoarding it to build in a static, perfect isolation, which means God values the messy over the efficient, which is why it says the grace of God gave the community apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. Mirroring God in Jesus, we are asked to co-create, and that we can't get it done alone. Or as a theologian said, the church is not simply an institution. She is a mode of existence, a way of being. The mystery of God, or the mystery of the church, is deeply bound to the being of humanity, to the being of the world, and to the very being of God. It is a way of relationship with the world, with other people, and with God, as an event of communion, and that is why it cannot be realized as the achievement of an individual, but only as the reality of community. So with that kind of thing in mind, with God named as Father, we cannot elevate any other person's claim to power as a single authority over the community. The household cannot become many kingdoms, many fiefdoms, where single rulers have the last word. It is a gift of God to avoid the efficiency of the single voice in order to embrace the slower, reconciling, holistic work of co-creating the future we hope to live into. Informed, but not delimited by the past. The future is God's dream to the degree it holds space for each of the voices to join and affect what is coming into existence. The problem is, we have habits of elevating one gift over the others, one voice over the others, and usually what we say, even if we say that we agree with the structure, we say, yes, that's good, but the one we're really going to listen to is over here. We default to the privileged position. We don't enter community as rational beings that we make these choices deliberately and upfront. It's not in the front of our heads. It's more in the back. It's in the inherited. We enter with sets of habits which form and inform how we hold space together, who gets to speak and why. Now, to have 5 voices designing instead of one master voice commanding, will take awkward attempts to establish new patterns of community. It'll take people risking by leaning into the parts of APEST they resonate with, so no one voice starts to rule by default. Now, before we go further, let's remember or remind ourselves of what Carl was talking about last week with the identities of what each of the pieces are, what each grace from God looks like for the community. And I'd invite you to listen and see which description actually resonates with you. Now, the apostles are movement. They help to imagine and start new ways of gathering together and being present in the spaces around us. Apostles can help us dream, scheme, and build structures needed for the growth of FOS in this season, discovering who we are on the other side of the pandemic shutdown. Prophets unsettle. They're often creative types and can help us be present to and aware of systemic issues both in the community and outside of it. Prophets can lead us into living out our communal identity as an agent of provocation, disrupting the comfortable and liberating the oppressed. The evangelists celebrate. They help us be inspired, and they awaken us to the good and beautiful in the world with a constant invitation to join in. Evangelists can help lead our community in discovering the good and the beautiful together and help us cultivate joy as they also teach us how to celebrate. Shepherds are embodied compassion. They show us how to show up and create space for others. Shepherds can lead us in cultivating hospitality and soul care practices in a hostile and soulless age. Teachers trouble the assumed and reveal how we got here. They open up our imagination to the possibility of deconstructing and reconstructing our faith in a way that helps us to see God and others anew. Teachers can lead us in learning to see the hope, beauty, and purpose in the story of Jesus. Having each voice present in FOS will enable us to become mature humans, growing into the full measure of maturity of Christ, no longer children, so no longer shallow thinking affected by everything around us reactionaries. Rather, we are those committed to the table, practicing the truth in love, growing in all things to emulate and become a part of the body, growing into the head that is Christ. That's the easy part. When we can agree to the idea of the longer process of co-creating over the efficiency of a single voice. We can even feel a resonance with one of the 5 graces of God. But what will it look like? What kind of tensions do we step into? For myself, it's usually a little bit vexing. See, I want to sit at the table with everyone, giving full agency and room to create, but if I'm honest, I tend to critique each of the other 5 by the rules of a teacher. I want everything said to not only be historically insightful and showing the development to who we are, but I want that always to be front and center. I get troubled by the apostles who want to move too quickly into action, or the evangelists who are excited over what I can only imagine are wrong reasons, because how can we always be excited and seeing joy? I'm confused by the people who are getting upset over new information, needing the shepherd to come and soul care for them. But that's good, because this shows me why I need each one of these people in life and in the community. It shows me where I lack, where my vision's short-sighted, that it's conditioned and honed in the idea of the teacher that says you must all sound, act, read, and research like me. So I'd ask you, who irritates you? Which habits go against the obvious right way to be human together that you see? Is it more those who move too quick or too slow? Is it like my father who often tells me, Glenn, don't tell me about the labor pain, just show me the baby? Because he doesn't care about historical development. He just wants a final answer that you can work from. But this way of being irritated also shows us what gift we bring to the table. And we give each other, honestly, the gift of irritation, because the apostle provokes me to move. The evangelist provokes me and stops me to remember to celebrate, where the shepherd reminds me that this is about humanity, not just right data. And all of this is part of the grace and gift of God. There will always be natural tension in this, when we all sit at the table together, not trying to give one the chief platform. Because the evangelist and the prophet are going to sit at opposite ends, where the evangelist wants to invite everybody into a celebration, while the prophet says, do you not see the corrupt and broken systems surrounding us, which have to be fixed before we can even think of celebrating? They need each other. The teacher and apostle will always be at odds, because the teacher wants to look back and trace the lines to here. Where we go isn't always the biggest concern, where the apostle is always trying to look forward, saying, if we just start walking there, we can create the path. We'll figure it out as we go. And then there's the poor shepherd who doesn't understand why no one can meet in the middle and why can't take care of each other, running around making sure that we all survive. Even in this series was the brainchild and desire of Carl, who is driven by an apostolic vision, riffing from the text, moving beyond the narrow confines of a single moment in history, so that we can experiment with a way of being in community, which might work better for the equipping of the saints for works of service, which will build up the body of Christ. Every critique or question I had was driven by my identity as a teacher, as one who cares more about the nuances of the first writings, the first speakers, than what could be experienced when APEST is turned into a typology. Because this typology isn't historically in Ephesians, which annoys the teacher in me. But it is in the Ephesians as read by an apostle who sees a new life-giving way to move forward, a more beautiful future ahead of us if we can start finding a way to practice to include more. So in the apostles' Ephesians, it's there in life-giving. In the teachers, it's a question. But the way we measure it is by how it allows all of us and all things to grow into the head that is Christ. And since Ephesians calls us to grow into Christ, it might help if we name the aspects of APEST being brought into the community in order, chaos, new creation. Order is that common sense, it's the expected, it's the status quo. It is the assumed right or real way the world works. Order is the narrative we've inherited, which defines the world and how we see it. Man is head of household. The patriarchal system in Ephesians is order. Ghettos are order. Who is the ideal person to run a church or to lead a country is order. It is these inherited ideas we were taught. They were not created by us. They were created before us. But we have the power to adapt them, to break them apart and put them back together, which brings chaos. Chaos is that point when you realize the stories you've inherited can't bring life anymore. It doesn't create enough room for people. And you suddenly see that your tradition isn't the only tradition of Christianity and doesn't define it all. That the family system you were born into brings more death than growth. And then you don't know how to start writing the next lines in your story. It's a point of unsettling where you can try to regress to old order or learn how to start the next chapter, which is new creation. And new creation is where we take ownership of the stories we live by and the ones we've inherited, adapting them to include the places we see life flourishing. And this will always be a partial new creation, because each time we construct it, we're obviously blind to the areas we cannot see until a new prophet, a new unsettling comes and says, do you not see where you stepped on live to get this order? And so our new creation will become another person's order, and it'll go through that process again, always moving towards the more beautiful. In this, the teacher traces the lines which brought us to this exact incarnation of order. They want us to know where we've been so we can understand how we got here, with the hope that knowing how we got here invites the community into reconstruction. They're not apologists, because tracing lines of history allows us to see that there are multiple pathways that could have been. And there are now multiple pathways into the future, depending on how we hope it to be. It is an expansive reality, not a shrinking one. It is polyvocal and open, not closed. The prophet sits between chaos and new creation. They point out the parts of our humanity that is sacrificed for staying in this particular order. They upset things. They're the ones marching for change. They name the inherited bias which kills to maintain the false peace now. Like the prophetic words of James Cone in The Cross and the Lynching Tree, who reminds us that we'll never see Jesus until we can see him in the face of the black man swinging from the willows. Those prophetic voices revealed white supremacy and the effect that it's had on the country, creating room for new life to begin. The apostle is driven by a hope of new. Sometimes it's new creation. They look out to where we could go if we'd risk on reconstruction after chaos. They are not blind to the present, but they live for the coming reality that cannot be named yet. They exist to draw the community towards a future we could not see without them. They're a catalyst they drive. The evangelist sits in the whole process. They get people excited to join, to continue, and to bring life into each stage. They remind us that even in chaos, that there are still beautiful parts to name and celebrate. And the shepherds sustain us in each stage of development. They make sure you have space and order. They give you strength to endure in chaos and enough courage to risk reconstructing authentically and vulnerably in community towards new creation. The shepherd is the reason why we all make it. Now, each mode of being will think the other ones lack insight, wisdom, or commitment. Faith is trusting the others are a touch of God's grace for the community. The challenge is keeping each one in the room without demanding they bend to your insights. Because if we let one part go, then we'll stop growing into the full humanity, the mature self in the area that we let go of. Our growth will be stunted. Without the teacher, we forget where we've come from and how to hold tension in our sacred text. Our wisdom becomes shallow and become people of rhetoric that only know how to divide and stay with those that agree with us. Without the apostles, we become comfortable in one spot. We never move into reconstruction because if we see all this chaos, we just stay there. If the order kind of works for us, we just stay there. Because they're the ones who show us how to get into the next. We might be able to trace how we got here, but we need the apostle to show us how to move toward new creation. Otherwise, life simply repeats. Without the evangelist, we forget that we should celebrate, we should pause, we should throw a party, that each moment of this process is not a definitive end, but is something to celebrate and move through, and they invite new life and invigorate. We lose that life, and it becomes bland and flavorless. Without the prophet, order wins. The status quo always carries out. They're the ones who reveal and unsettle so that we can create space for more life. Without them, we lose the ability to include. And without the shepherd, the community grows cold and loses heart. It forgets about becoming more human and is satisfied with just being more right. Now, which one are you? Where do you resonate? And how will your presence bring a touch of life and maturity to the whole community?